The heavens towering above the earth day after day bestowing their blessings illuminated the three states with light. Under this blinding radiance lived people, demons and ghosts. This whole world was not only for people. In the era of commercial law, which saw many transformations and was full of adversity and endless struggle for power. Meanwhile, in the Scylla state, young men of noble birth were taught to pray for the welfare of the nation and develop their spiritual powers. These young men were called warangs, and this story, which originated in Scylla, told the humble soul of one of them. Someone's voice said that when death came it was necessary to calm the soul and plunge into eternal sleep. The man looked at the night sky and asked if it was really necessary to do this, even if there was nothing at all on the other side. The main character, who was also looking at the sky, replied that this had to be done even if there was nothing on the other side. Hearing this answer, the man in black clothes assumed that his interlocutor now definitely understood everything. The next moment, without letting go of his sharp sword, the man said that his comrade had to retire. The black crows with bright red eyes were alarmed by something and made loud sounds. A girl in white clothes stood in a bloody river and thought about how it could happen that the harbinger of misfortune ended up among the warangs. Raising her head up, she thought that, because of this, strange events would happen one after another. Black crows began to fall dead from the sky. All this was accompanied by a rain of blood. The girl continued to watch what was happening and thought that, in the end, all this would lead to a huge catastrophe. Despite the late evening, life continued to boil in Sorable. One of the girls asked her friends if they had heard the story of the bloody rain that fell in Sangju. There were also rumors that in one village all the birds were standing dead and falling from the sky. One of the girls was very worried about this series of terrible omens. Holding a heavy box in her hands, she assumed that this was probably why their superiors were in such a hurry to carry out the ritual, so that it would calm the public unrest. Therefore, the girl believed that they should also help with the ritual. Suddenly, she noticed a person on the territory of the fortress. She realized that it was some girl and was very surprised by this because she should not have been here at such a time. Suddenly the girl felt anxious and an ominous aura seemed to begin to absorb her consciousness. She quickly came to her senses when one of her friends addressed her by name. Her name was Yam. A friend asked if they really had enough masks. Yam was still worried, so we answered the question right away. She said that the ritual masks were prepared exactly in accordance with the number of people. After that, the girls continued on their way. Masks of demons and ghosts were lying in a large box. One of the girls said that the sacrifice would go well only if they looked convincing, so everyone should think carefully and choose a mask. Putting on the mask, the friend asked Yom if she had seen how tense the warangs from the Golden Wheel Squad were acting. The girl confirmed this. Since the head of the warangs himself had to oversee this ritual, all members of the Golden Wheel Squad worked tirelessly. The girl continued to say that they all had to do their best to do their part well. Suddenly, something caught her attention. She looked into the box in surprise and saw that there was still one mask left, after which she asked her friends who among them had not yet made their choice. The girls immediately began to show off the masks they had put on their heads and said that they had already chosen. One of the girls, surprised, suggested that perhaps the number of masks had been counted incorrectly, but Yam immediately began to say that this was impossible, since she had checked several times. Silence immediately reigned in the room, because none of the girls knew how to explain what had happened. Everyone looked at the extra mask and couldn't understand where it could have come from. One of the girls took the mask in her hands and asked if her friends really didn't know where it started. She said that there were legends about these masks of monsters from the Heavenly Gallery. The palace servants went to the Sky Gallery to prepare a ceremonial dance. But soon something strange happened that was reminiscent of what happened to the girls. Everyone chose a mask for themselves and put it on their face, but in the end there was still one mask left in the box. The puzzled palace servants soon learned that one of them was wearing something that was not a mask. The girls listened attentively to the scary story, concentrating their attention entirely on it. The servant who was telling the story screamed loudly in order to frighten her friends. The girls immediately began to scream in fear. The joke clearly worked as the storyteller had planned. Then the girls began to ask their friend not to joke anymore, because it was so scary, Besides, they had to go already so as not to get punished by their elders for fooling around. The girls began to leave the room, and one of them asked everyone to be careful not to lose their masks. One of the attendants noticed her friend, who was in no hurry to follow them, and stood in place. She asked Yam what she was doing there and asked her to go faster, but continued to stand in place with her head down. This caused alarm in the attendant, and so she turned to her friend again. Meanwhile, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. The girl suddenly raised her head and looked at her friend with an angry gaze. It was clearly Yam. A strong wind arose in the room, which came from the girl. The sudden stronger gusts of wind frightened the other servants. The girls looked at their friend and did not understand what was wrong with her. Suddenly, one of the servants said that she saw something similar. This strange force and distorted mask indicated that it was an evil spirit. She continued to say that an evil spirit had entered Yam, so the girls needed to run away quickly because they couldn't do anything themselves. The servants immediately ran to the gate, hoping that the Warangs would come to their aid. A blood-red magical wall appeared in front of the girls. No matter how hard the servants tried, they could not pass through it. The attendants immediately realized that the evil spirit had put up a barrier and now they were trapped. Many of the girls began to cry and say that they did not want to die. They panicked and didn't understand what to do because they were completely isolated. Meanwhile, Yam, who was possessed by an evil spirit, was getting closer and closer. Her bright red eyes indicated that the evil spirit was about to do something terrible. The girls desperately beat their fists on the barriers and loudly asked to be saved, because that was the only thing they could do in this situation. The evil spirit opened its mouth and bared its sharp teeth and rushed at the palace servants, causing them to scream loudly in fear. A thin blue line appeared in the sky, which contrasted greatly with the red barrier. A small magical artifact that was enveloped in energy flew into the barrier at great speed, causing it to crack. The gates began to open in front of the frightened girls, from behind which a bright light shone. They no longer had any hope of getting out of here alive. All the servants immediately turned their gaze to the dark silhouette of the armed warrior who came to save them. The girls breathed a sigh of relief because they realized that today they would stay alive. Seeing the seal and the yin-yang pendant on the hilt of the warrior's sword, the servants immediately realized that it was Warang from the White Tiger Spirit Squad. The guy fearlessly moved forward to stop the evil spirit of the warrior, and his weapon was enveloped in unprecedented energy. Finally, he stopped and took a fighting stance, preparing for battle and covering the palace servant with himself. The girls were well aware that, in addition to everything else, this guy was also the king of demonic spirits. Suddenly the warrior turned to the servants and ordered them to hide. But because of their fear, the girls did not immediately understand where they should go. Then the guy extended his left hand forward. Out of nowhere, a bright blue section appeared in his palm. Thanks to his skill, the guy created a small magical dome that could protect whoever was inside. The guy immediately told the girls to stand still and go inside. The attendants quickly obeyed the order. The girls were surprised because they didn't expect that this particular guy would come to their aid before anyone else. An ominous aura arose around Yam, where the evil spirit was, but he was in no hurry to attack the king of spirits. The demon just looked at the guy angrily with his blood-red eyes and made loud ominous sounds. The servants were very frightened by this. They believed that they were still in danger, and in the meantime the aura of the will was spreading more and more around. Suddenly the warrior pushed off the ground with force and jumped high into the air. The guy swung his sword sharply to attack his opponent. The spirit that met the girl looked with apprehension as the warrior approached him closer and closer. The guy swung his sword, leaving a bright trace in space, but the spirit managed to dodge this blow. The demon began to quickly retreat back, not knowing how to attack the warrior. Without taking his eyes off his opponent, the guy prepared to attack him again. One of the girls who was watching the fight was surprised that the warrior was still standing on his feet. Her friend immediately assumed that the girl did not yet know about the king of demonic spirits. She recounted rumors that the boy was born with a spiritual power that was one of the most powerful even among the Warangs. Perhaps that is why he recognized the presence of the Za before the others. Several people in yellow clothes appeared at the gate and loudly asked what all the noise was about. They were the Warangs from the Golden Wheel Squad. Seeing what happened, They did not understand how this was possible because they were late. The king of demonic spirits knocked his opponent to the ground and grabbed him by the mask. After that, he began to direct streams of energy into the girl in order to drive away the evil spirit. The demon screamed terribly loudly throughout the entire area, but the warrior did not pay attention to this and continued to do his job. The guy directed energy into the girl until the mask on her face began to crack. Very soon the demon's mask was completely broken, which indicated that the evil spirit had left the servant's body, and now she was not in any danger. The work of the king of demonic spirits was finished. The energy that had been hovering around all this time began to dissipate. The silence that was typical for this time of day reigned over the palace grounds. The Warangs from the Golden Wool Squad thought that they were about to get into big trouble, but fortunately everything turned out okay. It was unknown what would happen if someone were to suffer during the ritual they were supposed to observe, but what interested the warriors most was why the king of demonic spirits had come. Seeing the main character's contemptuous look, the warriors thought that he believed that they were unworthy of being Warangs, because they did not notice the commotion with the ghost happening under their noses. One of the guys from the Golden Will Squad tried to find an excuse for his lateness, but he was interrupted by someone's loud voice asking how it could happen that the harbinger of misfortune ended up among the Warangs. The main character immediately looked at the servant whom he had just saved from the evil spirit. The girl, clearly not herself, continued to shout that strange events would happen one after another, and in the end it would lead to a huge catastrophe. The guy looked at the servant in surprise, not understanding why she was saying such things. The people who came with the warriors from the Golden Will detachment began to discuss among themselves what they had heard before about the harbinger of misfortune, and did not understand how this was possible. The man in yellow clothes could not believe that the harbinger of misfortune was among them. Then the second man said that they should have believed the great ruler, because even the flute that destroys evil was defiled. The seal that was on the handle of the demonic spirit king broke a little. The main character watched in surprise as she was destroyed before his eyes for no reason. The seal exploded, scattering fragments all around. This was a very bad sign. The warriors from the Golden Will Squad and their colleagues were very frightened when they saw this. They couldn't believe that the Inyang seal that belonged to Sol Yun was broken. This seal was a divine artifact that symbolized the Warang it belonged to. It shouldn't break just like that, so what happened looked ominous. The man was struck by lightning as he realized that if there was a harbinger of misfortune among the Warangs, he was now standing before them. The warriors from the Golden Wheel Squad immediately looked towards the main character. The palace servants also began to look at their savior with apprehension. Sol Yun didn't pay attention to this because she was looking at the fragments that remained from his seal, and which the magical power was leaving. The main character silently thought about how this could happen to him and what it all meant. Looking at his comrades, he saw one of the men pointing his finger at him. He directly stated that the harbinger of misfortune was Sol Yun, who controlled the spirits. There were 5 divisions that consisted of Warangs and their Nando subordinates who wanted to rise to the title of Warang in the future. These divisions were part of the Golden Wheel, the head of which was the Warang of the Blue Dragon, White Tiger, Red Phoenix, and Black Snake Turtle divisions. The White Tiger division committed a misdeed in the past when they used demons to play a prank on the other Warangs. The instigator was the youngest of the Warangs. The main character of this story lost his parents early and was raised by spirits in the mountains. He had the talent to control entire groups of spirits, which is why he was nicknamed the Ghostly Demon King. For this same reason, the Warangs from the other divisions strongly disliked him. The then commander of the White Tiger Division, Baek-san, accepted him, taking responsibility for all of the boy's past sins. Sol Yun made the right choice, and thanks to this, he became one of the Warangs in the White Tiger Division. The first thing the main character had to do to join the division was to seal his power. Although the other division heads were against the guy joining their ranks because of his reputation, they agreed to let Baek-san seal the guy's power in the Inyang pendant. But one day the seal was broken, and this happened at the same moment when the guy was accused of being a harbinger of evil signs. There was an active discussion of what had happened in the Grace Pavilion. One of the participants in the meeting loudly said that he completely trusted Captain Waren's decision. The second commander of the White Tiger Division, named Sun Ok, disagreed and asked whether his colleague would unleash all the dogs on an innocent person. The third commander of the White Tiger Division, named Hyo-woo, smiled good-naturedly and asked his comrade to calm down, because he was sure that the captain would not kick anyone out. The next moment he took the sword in his hands and added that if everything turned out to be true, then the Grace Pavilion would drown in their own blood. Both commanders bowed their heads and asked the captain to make a wise decision. One of the participants in the meeting began ringing a bell to attract attention and asked the commanders to calm down. The great tiger of the White Tiger Division named Baek-un said that no matter how the commanders practiced their eloquence, the final decision would not change from this, but he would talk about it with the captain. Both commanders immediately calmed down and thanked their superior colleague. Hearing all this, one of the participants in the meeting sighed heavily. His appearance indicated that he was not the last person. It was Captain Jean Rim who said that he assumed that the commanders would show up for the meeting and created a mess here. Baek-un turned to the captain and said that everyone knew that Sol-yun had caused a lot of trouble in the past, but that was a thing of the past. Although the prophecies were suspicious, the great tiger mottos of the White Tiger were sure that the guy's soul was pure, and if it were not so, his sword would have reacted to it long ago. Jean Rim agreed with these words, but said that the problem that arose was difficult to solve. The captain continued to say that during that incident in the palace after the prophecy was pronounced, Seol-yun's pendant was destroyed, but it was not just a symbol of belonging to the Hwarang. It was also a seal that concealed the protagonist's power, which was placed by Mr. Baek-san himself. If it weren't for this seal, both of Sol-yun's hands would have been cut off for studying demonic arts and summoning spirits. The captain continued to say that now that the seal was no longer there, the main character would not only be banished from Whanno, but he would also be able to summon spirits again. He went on to say that people blinded by such power went berserk and died during the summoning of spirits, or demons stole their souls, so even if the guy was innocent, others would not believe it. The captain asked if it was appropriate for him to stand aside calmly when a conflict was brewing within the units. The second and third commanders were not at all happy to hear these words, but they could do nothing. The main character, who was also present at this meeting, turned to the captain and asked him for permission to speak. Jean Rim of course allowed Sol-yun to have his say and began to listen to him attentively. The guy started saying that he knew how to summon spirits, but on the other hand, it was not forbidden to practice this. The captain agreed with this. He also added that until now it was not known for certain what caused the death of Bai-hyun, who was the first spirit summoner from Hwarang. That is why the main character said that he would like to take control of this situation and try to make sure that the captain no longer has any doubts about him. Sun Ok was very happy with these words and said that they would work together and sort everything out, and then the flute that destroyed evil would return to normal. Sol-yong thanked his comrades for their support but asked who would look after the division in that case, or would they all follow him around. The guy also added that his suspension was broken and therefore he was no longer considered Hwarang. The commanders listened to these words in surprise, not understanding what Sol-yun was getting at. The protagonist directly stated that this was precisely why he wanted to leave the White Tiger Division. The commanders were not at all pleased with these words. They immediately pounced on the guy, trying to dissuade him from this decision. Sol-yun continued to insist on his own and explained that he wanted to leave his comrades for a while and then return. The main character promised that he would dispel all suspicions that arose around him and return to the division with a clean reputation. Jean Rim looked at Sol-yun, who had his head bowed, silently for a while, thinking about his words. Soon the captain nodded his head in agreement with the main character and gave him his approval. Jean Rim wished the guy good luck on his way to achieving his goal. Sol-yun thanked the man for these words. After this, the main character went to the Temple of the White Cloud, where people immediately began to ask if he was really going to leave. Two little boys who were training to become members of the White Tiger Division ran up to Sol-yun and started saying that it was all too sudden and they would be lonely without him. The main characters replied that shadows also appeared and disappeared during the day and asked the boy to train hard during his absence. The commanders of the division that was walking towards him turned to Sol-yun and asked if the guy had already gotten ready. After that, they handed the main character several bags of supplies and a small bag of gold. The guy was very surprised by this. Hyo-woo began to ask Sol-yun not to skimp and to sleep in comfort and warmth and also to eat only in decent establishments. The main character bowed respectfully and said that his comrades took care of him even though he brought a lot of problems. So he was very grateful and promised that he would never forget their kindness. Baek-un asked the guy to be careful and even if other Hwarangs get into trouble, not to fall for these provocations. The comrades sent a glance at Sol Yun, who soon disappeared behind the gate. After some time, the main character was already walking through a quiet forest, moving further and further away from his home. The boy remembered the past and thought that he would hardly be able to adequately repay his elders for their care. Sol Yun decided that he did everything to relieve them of their worries. These thoughts gave the main character strength and motivated him to move forward. In the middle of the forest, a man blocked the guy's path and addressed him by name, which indicated that they were well acquainted. This was unexpected, but it didn't frighten him at all. The guy lazily looked ahead. In front of him, he saw several men in blue clothes. One of them said that he had heard that the main character's powers that were sealed in the pendant had returned to him. That person was the Blue Dragon Division commander named Sho Jiam, who wanted to personally express his gratitude to the boy for helping the Blue Dragon Division during his absence. Sol Yun immediately realized that the commander had actually come only to mock him. After that, the guy said that he was the first of all who was supposedly hunting him. Sho Jiam did not deny this and smiled slyly, saying that there had been enough conversation. After that, the guy pushed himself hard off the ground in order to get closer to his opponent, asking him to show what he was capable of. The commander was already very close to the main character and began to take his sword out of its sheath in order to attack him. Sol Yun stood calmly in place, waiting for the right moment to carry out his plan. Sho Jiam swung his sword sharply, but quickly realized that his opponent had managed to jump high into the air and dodge his attack. This surprised the Blue Dragon Division commander. Along the way, the main character said that he would be happy to chat with the guy some more, but he was asked not to get involved in a fight with him. Sho Jiam watched the protagonist's actions closely, not understanding what he was going to do. Sol Yun created a magic card using his power. The forest was filled with an ominous aura, and evil spirits appeared out of nowhere and directed their gaze towards the captain of the Blue Dragon Division and his companions. Sho Jiam knew perfectly well what was waiting for him ahead, but he was still shocked that Sol Yun decided to do this. The main character said that he was too busy now and began to leave while his opponents were disabled by evil spirits. Amazed by the guy's impudence, tried to stop him, but Sol Yun quickly jumped from tree to tree and disappeared into the dense forest. Having run a decent distance, the main character stopped to look around. The guy looked attentively into the distance and thought about something meticulously. He looked for the last time at his hometown, which stretched out into the distance. The main character regretted that he had to leave his home along with the people he held dear. But Sol Yun did not despair and, adjusting her load, she thought that he would definitely return home soon. Sol Yun left his division and went to Sabial province, a wasteland where bloody rains fell. The main character had to study the strange phenomenon because people thought that Sol Yun was the beginning of the strange incidents predicted by the main prophet. After some time, the guy got to the right place and soon solved the case related to the bloody rains. In his hands, the main character held a pot in which was the body of Imuga, a huge sea serpent. He was unable to turn into a dragon and was defiled. A group of shamans used his powers for various evil deeds, and when this power became too great, they buried the corpse in the wastelands and fled. It was he who was the cause of the bloody rains. The people to whom the main characters told all this were shocked and could not believe that shamans could do such a thing. They were also interested in how the guy managed to find out about this. Explained that spiritual beings left their traces on objects and in space, and he simply read these traces. One of the listeners thought that this was why he had been feeling so tired lately and was afraid that they had somehow angered the gods. In conclusion, the main characters promised that now the red rain in this area should stop. People were very happy to hear this. After some time, the guy set off again, and the grateful residents all together saw off their savior, waving their hands after him. The cause of the bloody rains turned out to be people and not otherworldly forces, which means that this matter had nothing to do with the prophecy. Soon, Sol Yun entered a strange dark forest. The trees here were bare of leaves and the fog was spreading more and more around. The main character did not pay any attention to this at all and continued to move forward, thinking that first he needed to report everything to the captain. Sol Yun felt the approach of an ominous aura, which was complemented by a quiet and prolonged howl. This caught the guy off guard. The main character immediately stopped and listened into the silence. Suddenly, a long howl was heard again, but it clearly did not belong to a wild animal. Sometime later, the guy began to hear voices that began to frequently repeat that he was bad and had to cry. Sol Yun saw that from the darkness. Several dozen pairs of bright, glowing eyes that belonged to a dark silhouette were looking at him. The guy was surprised that there were so many evil spirits and assumed that they wanted to get the skeleton of Imugu. He continued walking, thinking that if he started fighting, he would have no spiritual strength left. The main character continued to think that he needed to break away and get to some deserted place. Soon he saw bright lights in the distance and decided to head there. Suddenly, the guy remembered the words of Commander Bekun about how May was called the month of bad luck because at that time monsters were most active, so one had to be careful. Entering a small roadside establishment, Sol Yun was very surprised by what he saw inside. There were no visitors here at all, so the main character immediately asked where they all were. The young worker laughed at this and replied that he and his grandfather also thought it was strange. The guy continued to say that it was a pretty busy road, so it was usually crowded. But today, Sol Yun was their first visitor. The main character sat down at the table and thought that some bad events pulled a chain of others behind them and perhaps everything was worse than it seemed at first glance. Sol Yun turned to the employees of the establishment and said that something bad could probably happen here soon. So he advised them to leave. The employees did not understand what he meant. Drawn-out howl was heard on the street, which attracted the attention of everyone who was in the tavern. The evil spirits again began to repeat the word bad many times and try to open the door. Sol Yun immediately ordered the establishment's employees to quickly go to the back exit, because it was supposed to be safe there. The frightened young man obeyed and took his grandfather away. The main character again began to listen to the sounds coming from the street and heard someone knocking on the door. Demonic black entities began to penetrate through the windows of the establishment. A whole stream of black mass, reminiscent of writing ink, gushed into the room. The room was quickly swallowed by darkness, from which bright eyes looked at the main character and voices repeated many times that the guy was bad. Calmly sipping his drink, the guy thought about whether all the Yoma of Sabil province were really coming here and thought that it would not be easy to deal with them. Putting the glass on the table, Sol Yun remembers that on the way here, he saw many cemeteries and so he got an idea. The main character took out his sharp sword and made a small cut on his hand, causing scarlet blood to gush out. He stuck the bloody sword into the floor, after which bright magical symbols immediately appeared on it. Enormous streams of energy were released outward, and Sol Yun turned to the otherworldly forces and asked for permission to use them to fight the demons. The energy instantly turned into mythical creatures that instantly swept away the demons from their path. Seeing these creatures, the main character was surprised because he expected to see the god Sabial. The guy watched as the creatures destroyed the demons and thought about what kind of person was buried nearby if he had such huge guardian beasts. Meanwhile, the battle continued and it seemed that the spiritual beings were doing quite well, destroying one demon after another. Soon the main character took a sword in his hand and, surrounded by guardian beasts, prepared to enter the battle as well. Seeing this, the demons looked quite unusual, as if they were scared, but were in no hurry to run away. Sol Yun looked at them with a menacing gaze and prepared to attack. The guy swung his sword and was able to immediately cut off the head of one of the demons. Next in line were a wolf with several heads and a lion with the head of a bird, who were also unlucky enough to meet Sol Yun. The main character continued to swing his sword until everything in the room was filled with corpses of demons and the walls, ceiling and floor were painted with their blood. All this took a lot of strength from the guy, so he already began to feel tired, which is why he was breathing heavily. He looked at what was happening and thought that it was not so easy to deal with the demons because they spent too much spiritual energy, so the guy could not hold out for long. Sol Yun quickly threw these thoughts away and, brushing the demon blood off his sword, felt that he had to make sure that the people here were not in danger. The main character finally decided that if he was destined to die here, then he would at least take his opponents with him to the next world. Suddenly the door to the establishment opened and someone's voice asked if there was anyone inside. A young guy dressed in expensive clothes stood at the threshold and asked if the establishment was open. The fight that had been going on before immediately stopped and everyone began to look at the guest, as well as the guardian animals who helped him, were very surprised to see a stranger who was not afraid to enter the establishment. Having received no answer, the guy continued to stand there, not understanding whether he could have gone inside. The guest felt awkward and tried his best to find out once again whether the establishment was open, but was embarrassed to ask directly about it. Continuing to look at the guy, Sol Yun could not feel any spiritual strength in him, which meant that he was an ordinary person who looked like the son of a wealthy family. The main character was very interested in what the stranger was doing here at such a late hour and thought that he needed to make him leave before something irreparable happened. Meanwhile, the unusual guest silently looked around and thought about something meticulously. There were splashes of blood and scattered things all around, and the demons and guardian beasts who had recently fought each other mercilessly were now just looking at the guy in surprise. The guy saw bottles of alcohol standing on the table and thought that this meant that the establishment was definitely open. The main character seemed to be struck by lightning because this was the only thing the stranger paid attention to, and everything else didn't seem to surprise him at all. The guy immediately headed to the center of the room, avoiding puddles of blood and lifeless bodies of demons along the way, completely ignoring it. As if nothing had happened, the guest again began to say that all the noise coming from the establishment had woken him up and now he was simply dying of thirst. Continuing to confidently move forward, he decided that a drink was just what he needed right now. The guy's face was absolutely serene and calm. Walking further and further, he cast a barely noticeable glance at the main character. The stranger confidently walked into the establishment, deciding that a drink was just what he needed right now. The guy's face was absolutely serene and calm. Walking further and further, he cast a barely noticeable glance at the main character. Sol Yun was very surprised by this and assumed that the guy was drunk or simply had not woken up completely, since he did not react at all to the corpses of the demons. The main character brushed the blood of the evil spirits off his sword and apologized for the noise, saying that he did not expect that someone could sleep nearby. Bowing respectfully, the guy continued to say that in any case, the owner and employees of the establishment were not here. He also asked the stranger to pay attention to the fact that there were mutilated bodies of demons scattered everywhere, so it was better for him to look for another place to rest. The guest seemed not to take Sol Yun's words seriously and walked past him, showing that he had no intention of leaving. He approached the table on which lay many valuable things, from jewelry and weapons to books and scrolls. The guy began to examine all these valuables, surprised that everyone ran away, leaving these treasures here, and assumed that the employees of the establishment were in a big hurry. The main character was already starting to get angry and asked if the stranger heard what he told him or if he was simply ignoring him. The guy again did not pay any attention to these words and continued to examine the treasures. Then Sol Yun directly stated that the guest would bother him if he stayed here. The main character suggested that he should have simply thrown the impudent fellow out into the street. These thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected demonic cry, which reminded that the battle was still not over despite the appearance of an unexpected guest. The demons immediately began to move forward, growling and making ominous sounds as they went. They were not heading towards the main character, but towards the guy who had suddenly appeared and was now still looking at the things lying on the table. Sol Yun realized that he couldn't hesitate and already swung the ball to attack the enemies first. Suddenly the guest took the sword from the table and, surprised at how good it was, immediately used it on the demons, destroying everyone who came close to it. The main characters were amazed by the speed and skills of a seemingly ordinary person and could not believe what he had just seen. The stranger looked to the side in confusion and saw how splashes of demonic blood were flying in all directions. The guy was surprised and said that he simply drew his sword. After that, he noticed that the demons began to surround him from all sides and get closer and closer. A monster with 3 snakes instead of a head rushed at the guy in order to quickly deal with him. But the guest, without further ado, swung his sword and cut his enemy in half without putting in any particular effort. He said that this situation was dangerous and therefore it was better for the demons to keep their distance and not approach him. Sol Yun silently watched the stranger, understanding that he was not an ordinary person and had come to this establishment for a reason. The silence of the night was suddenly interrupted by a loud explosion that was heard in a roadside establishment. The main characters immediately jumped to the side, trying to escape the danger that was pursuing him. Moving further and further away, The guy looked attentively at what was happening below and thought that he understood everything. Sol Yun assumed that the stranger had been hiding his spiritual powers from him all this time so as not to reveal himself prematurely. The guy also suggested that with such a level of knowledge and skills, this person must have already begun his path to immortality. It seemed to the main character that this stranger he met that night was stronger than the division commanders and perhaps even the captain himself. But at the same time, the guy did not believe that someone like that could actually exist. Very quickly, the main character landed on the ground and began to wait for what would happen next. The stranger also left the tavern after the guy. Sol Yun thought that the guest used force regardless of whether there was someone or something nearby. The guy realized that this suspicious man didn't give a damn about everything that surrounded him. Therefore, the protagonist could not relax his vigilance just because the stranger dealt with the demons. At this time, the guest looked around and asked if all his opponents had already fled. Sol Yun watched the guy closely, because he did not believe that he had come just to help. After this, the main character turned to the stranger, calling him sir, and asked where he came from. The guy was very surprised that Sol Yun called him master. It even amused him, smiling slyly, asked why the main character had suddenly spoken to him so friendly, and added that now it was his turn to fight him. Sol Yun thought that the stranger was definitely out of his mind. After that, he prepared to use one of his abilities. At the same time, the stranger was too strong to fight with, so the main character decided that it was better to escape while there was an opportunity, and for this he decided to use a magic card. Several guardian beasts appeared near the guy, which he summoned to distract the stranger. Sol Yun already wanted to give them the order to attack, but for some reason the guardians did not listen to him at all and stood in place. The main character was shocked and did not understand why they suddenly stopped listening to him. Seeing the guardian animals, the stranger thought that the guy was brave, but added that they did not obey him at all. Sol Yun immediately realized that the guest was somehow involved in this. The stranger, making fun of his opponent, asked if he had any other tricks. The main character grimaced and thought that he no longer had any other choice. Somehow the enemy immediately understood what the guy was planning to do and praised him, saying that this was already more interesting. Several bolts of lightning struck the ground, from which a huge guardian armed with a sword appeared. Seeing his opponent, immediately screamed loudly, showing him his rage and desire to fight him. He headed towards the stranger with great speed in order to engage in battle with him. All this was accompanied by powerful lightning discharges and loud explosions in the sky. However, this did not frighten the guy at all. He looked attentively at the approaching danger and said that, as he thought, he would not be able to save the enemy's life. The guardian had already opened his mouth wide in order to swallow his opponent. The stranger did not resist in any way and remained standing in place, prepared for what would happen. Gradually the light began to fade and the darkness completely engulfed the guy, who, despite everything, remained just as calm. This darkness was broken by a small bright flash that seemed to appear out of nowhere. This was followed by several powerful sword swings that left behind a bright trail of light. It turned out that the guy attacked the keeper from the inside and completely destroyed him, remaining completely unharmed. Sol Yun began to cough up blood from exhaustion, because his spiritual energy was already at its limit. Having come to his senses a little, the main character saw how his opponent's sword was very close to him and was very surprised by this. Suddenly, the stranger struck several blows that could easily have killed the guy if he had not been able to defend himself. Sol Yun jumped back away from his dangerous opponent in order to recover and think about his next steps. The main character's entire body trembled from powerlessness and fear, because he did not understand how someone could be so strong. Wiping away his own blood, Sol Yun was sure that the stranger definitely wanted to kill him. The guy looked at his opponent and thought about what he should do, because none of the skills worked on him. Sol Yun was nervous and looked away with regret because he only had one option left. This option was a strange piece of wood that the guy was holding in his hands. Sol Yun knew that this thing seemed to drive out evil, and so, for lack of an alternative, he completely trusted it and concentrated his spiritual energy in his hand. The small piece of wood immediately began to crack into small pieces, emitting a bright light. It was so bright that the stranger, taken by surprise, had to cover his eyes with his hand to avoid going blind. The dark night forest was instantly illuminated by a bright flash of light that was clearly visible from afar. Soon this glow disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Darkness once again took over. Opening his eyes, Sol Yun looked in the direction where his opponent was, not understanding whether this glow had worked at all. The main character was very surprised by what he saw and was stunned for a moment. The guy looked at his opponent without looking away and did not understand where the suspicious aura that he clearly felt was coming from. There was something wrong with the stranger too. After the bright flash he had experienced, he still hadn't opened his eyes and was holding his head with his hand. There was a bequeathing aura around the guy that seemed to come from his body and spread around. The stranger looked at the main character with hatred and his blood-red eye, as if he saw him as the cause of all his troubles. Sol Yun immediately realized that at this moment he was dealing with the devilish energy that his opponent possessed. A sharp cry of madness, a merciless strait capable of consuming this world, pain that gave birth to pain led to despair and created a vicious circle. All this was felt with just one look at the stranger. Sol Yun immediately realized that at this moment he was dealing with the devilish energy that his opponent possessed. The main character thought that she was very different from the energy of death or the energy of demons. She exuded danger. The guy didn't understand how his opponent got such power. Sol Yun was very curious and always tried to know even what he shouldn't have, but he had never seen anything like it. The stranger looked at the protagonist with hatred from his blood-red eye and turned to him. He didn't have time to say what he wanted because he stumbled and started coughing. The bright light that drove out the darkness clearly had a negative effect on him. Suddenly the guy raised his hand, after which a small spark lodged in his sleeve. The stranger raised his other hand to take the object out of his sleeve. A bright golden chain burst out of it, emitting light and seeming to move on its own. Very quickly she wrapped herself around the stranger as if trying to shackle him. A bright light shone again over the night forest, easily dispersing the darkness. After some time, the gold chain dispersed into the air and the stranger seemed to feel much better. The guy turned to the main character again and asked with displeasure what he had just done. Sol Yun responded by asking why he had to explain this. After that, he thought that if he had another piece of wood, he would have blocked his opponent's energy completely. Looking at the remains of that tree, the guy regretted that this piece had broken right away and thought that he needed to find out what exactly it was. Clenching his hand into a fist, the protagonist told his opponent that now he knew exactly who he was. He believed that the stranger was the owner of the great golden chi that was capable of suppressing demonic energy. Only a warrior of the Golden Will motto who had mastered all the techniques could achieve it. The main character rudely asked the stranger if his captain knew about all this and added that using something like this was a disgrace to the Golden Wheel. Suddenly the guy asked why Sol Yun assumed that he was from the Golden Will division, whom he considered idiots. The main character was very surprised by these words. He could not believe it and assumed that the stranger was lying to him. The uninvited guest continued to insist that the guy answer his question. Squeezing his hand into a fist, Sol Yun began to say that it was necessary to return to the true state, because the main truths were hidden in the details. Thick clouds of smoke appeared out of nowhere and quickly spread throughout the forest. The stranger was very surprised by this. The main character was sure that his opponent did not know that he had only one piece of wood and was probably afraid that he would use such a base. So the guy decided that he should just run away before the stranger figured it out. After that, the guy turned around and ran into a cloud of smoke. At that very moment, a stranger's hand reached out from the impenetrable curtain at great speed to grab the main character. Sol Yun immediately noticed this and realized that he wouldn't be able to leave so easily. The guy quickly jumped to the side and began to look around into the thick smoke in order to determine where his opponent was. The stranger calmly came out of the smoke and asked what the main character was doing. The guy was indignant that his opponent did not give him even a second to relax. At the same time, the stranger threw the sword that he stole from Sol Yun onto his shoulder. Seeing this, the main character was shocked and froze in place. The guy immediately looked at his belt and didn't believe what had happened, but the sword really wasn't there, which really scared him. Having thrown away her sword, the stranger began to examine her opponent's weapon and said that it was indeed a good sword. Sol Yun was very surprised that this guy managed to steal his sword, which he got from his teacher and was very valuable to him. This angered the protagonist. So he rudely asked how the stranger dared to do this and demanded that he immediately hand over the weapon. The guy tried to snatch his sword from the stranger's hands, but this was not destined to happen. The next moment, the guy hit the main character on the back with all his might, while saying that he would not give him the sword. This made Sol Yun fall to the ground and become very angry because he could not defeat his opponent and now lost something dear to him. Feeling his superiority, the stranger ordered the protagonist not to move unless he wanted him to break his shoulder. The guy put Sol Yun's sword on his shoulder and pressed hard, causing him severe pain. In this way, he showed that his threats were not just words. Then the stranger decided to ask one last time what kind of ability the main character had recently used. Sol Yun honestly answered that he himself did not know this and simply tried to use what was there, and it worked. The stranger was surprised by this answer, but he thought that since the guy started running away, he really wasn't lying. Then the guy smiled slyly and said that since the main character didn't know anything, he shouldn't have bothered, after which he asked what his opponent's last words would be. Sol Yun understood why the guy was asking this question and what would happen next, so he began to deny such a fate, which surprised the stranger. The main character said that he completed the mission assigned to him, but if he dies now, everyone will say that he failed because they will not know the whole situation. Sol Yun understood the situation he found himself in and began to think that he could not even imagine that he would die like this. Looking angrily at the stranger, the guy swore to himself that he would remember this man's face and take revenge on him after his death in the form of a ghost. At the same time, the stranger was very interested in what mission the main character was talking about, so he asked him to tell him about it. Sol Yun started to say that he promised the captain that he would deal with unusual incidents like the bloody rain. The guy asked if they were talking about Captain Jean Rim. Having received an affirmative answer from the stranger, it was as if lightning had struck him, and he said that now everything was clear to him. The guy assumed that the captain had arrested the main character and said that he would let him go despite the fact that he was an evil demon if he did good deeds for people. Hearing all this, Sol Yun did not understand at all why his opponent assumed exactly this. The guy said that the stranger was mistaken because he was not a demon but a warrior of Warang. The main character's opponent was taken aback by the surprise, and his face froze in an incomprehensible smile. He couldn't believe how this was possible, because the guy's sword was without the yin-yang pendant and there was no division mark on his clothes. The stranger menacingly demanded that Sol Yun tell him everything in more detail. The main character asked why he had to tell this, because he would not obey his opponent in everything just because he threatened him with fractures. The stranger smiled and said that he did not intend to break bones, after which he raised the protagonist's sword up. Then he began to squeeze the weapon tightly in his hand, which made it start to shake, and it seemed like it was about to break. Seeing this, Sol Yun understood everything and said that he was a warrior of the White Tiger Division, but due to some incidents he was no longer with them. This conversation lasted until dawn. The stranger could not believe that the chief prophet called the guy a messenger of bad omens. He looked at the guardian beasts that Sol Yun had summoned and continued to say that such a thing simply could not happen. The main character asked his opponent how he could know this, because he had abandoned everything in favor of the dark path, and at the same time the guy freed the guardians from the call. To this, the stranger responded with displeasure that the guy was using other people's graves for his own purposes and the person lying there would be offended. Sol Yun replied that as a child he robbed graves every day and nothing happened to him yet. In addition, he always made a promise to the deceased. The stranger asked what this promise was. Then the guy explained that he promised that he would pray for the reincarnation of the person whose grave he used. The main character continued to say that his strength was highly valued among the ghosts and therefore they allowed him to sleep next to them, gave him food and helped him. The stranger was surprised but did not ask any more questions and gave the guy the opportunity to fulfill the promise given to the deceased. Sol Yun knelt down and folded his hands in front of him and began to pray for the reincarnation of the people whose guardian beasts he used. The stranger continued to watch the main character with interest, no longer trying to harm him. Meanwhile, the guardian beasts had completely disappeared, leaving behind only small sparks that quickly rose upward and disappeared in the rays of the early sun. At the foot of the mountain there was a small village. Local residents went about their daily business and walked the streets without worrying about anything. Sol Yun visited a local establishment to have breakfast and sat silently at the table enjoying the hot food. Suddenly, the main character said that his companion should not have followed him. The same stranger who tried to kill Sol-yun, sitting down at the table, was surprised and asked if someone was following the guy. The main character confirmed this, to which his new acquaintance asked who it was. In response, Sol-yun asked the guy what he thought. The stranger thought about this question for a while, as if he did not understand at all who could really be pursuing the main character. Finally, he asked with a wide smile if the guy really meant him. Sol-yun was in no mood to joke. Then the stranger said that he was just going his own way, but the main character had a hard time believing it. A waitress approached the guy, put a glass of water on the table, and asked if the gentleman would like to place an order. The stranger immediately said that he wanted to be brought the same food as Sol-yun. The guy was irritated but said nothing. After this, the stranger began to look for money to pay for the food. Suddenly, he was taken aback by the unexpectedness, and a smile of despair froze on his face. The waitress looked menacingly at the visitor and asked if the gentleman really had no money. The guy was nervous and couldn't answer this. Then the woman started shouting that their establishment did not issue loans even to the most high-ranking officials, after which she asked how the guy could do such a thing. The main character suddenly began to get up from his table. Approaching the waitress, Sol-yun said that he would pay for the guy who had no money, after which he gave her the required amount. The stranger, smiling good-naturedly, began to justify himself by saying that he had not left the house for so long that he had completely forgotten about his empty wallet. He continued to say that he was very lucky to meet the main character on his way. To this, Sol-yun replied that it would have been much easier if the guy had simply killed him that time. After that, he asked why the stranger continued to follow him. The guy only smiled slyly, as if he had no intention of explaining his motives. But Sol-yun continued to silently look at the annoying acquaintance and humbly wait for him to answer the question posed. The stranger, smiling good-naturedly, said that he wanted to return the money for the lunch to the main character. Having heard this, the main character continued to look at his new acquaintance with suspicion for some time. The guy put his wallet on the table and asked the stranger not to worry about it. Sol-yun said that he wished the stranger would just disappear from his life and not follow him anymore. The guy moved further and further away while his former opponent watched him, remaining in place. The stranger watched him go, thinking about something meticulously. He took the main character's wallet, which he left for him, and threw it away because in fact he didn't need the money at all. The central mountain was a sacred place of Buddhism. There was a small Buddhist temple located here. Deep in the mountain there was a miraculous spring that purified the swords of the Warangs. So this place was visited by the residents of Warang for a long time. The main character remembered the words of Commander Baekun, who, before leaving, asked the guy to take care of himself because he was worried about him. Raised higher and higher into the mountains, Sol-yun thought that the captain had probably already run out of water from the spring and therefore needed to replenish it. The main character also considered that the stranger who had embarked on the dark path would definitely not be able to climb such an immaculate mountain, and there was no better place to break away from him. Sol-yun looked back and saw if his annoying acquaintance was following him. This greatly pleased the main character, who no longer felt the presence of the stranger, and this made him very happy. Soon the guy reached a Buddhist temple that was located high in the mountains and hidden among the rocks. Suddenly, the main character saw the temple ministers who were discussing something heatedly. The guy immediately realized that something was wrong here. Approaching one of the worried men, Sol-yun asked where the head monk was now. The temple attendant, visibly nervous, replied that the chief monk had said that he would not be accepting anyone for the time being. This surprised Sol-yun, after which he asked what happened to the other monks, to which he received a similar answer. The temple minister said that a little earlier a stranger had come to them, whose words shocked all the monks. The man continued to say that when this man left, the monks said that they would not accept anyone for some time. After this, the main character asked who that strange guest was, but the temple minister was forbidden to talk about it. Then, considering all this strange, the guy was about to leave. Sol-yun wondered who the stranger could be until he saw something in front of him that surprised him. An annoying acquaintance of the main character stood calmly in his path, as if he was waiting specifically for him. Seeing the guy, he smiled because it was a joy to meet him again. The main character was not at all delighted with this meeting and thought that he did not want to communicate with this person at all. The stranger threw something to Sol Yun and asked her to take it for herself. The main character was very surprised because it was water from that very source. The stranger said that he fulfilled his promise and paid the guy for the dinner. After that, Sol Yun asked how the guy knew that he was going specifically for water. The acquaintance replied that there was only one reason why Warang could come here with an empty flask. The main character continued to say that the head monk of the temple was extremely strict and he would never share such a treasure with just anyone. The stranger happily replied that this was precisely why he decided to intervene, so that the guy would definitely be able to get what he came here for. He continued to say that otherwise the main character would have had to spend a long time and effort proving to the stubborn monk that he was truly who he was. Although he didn't want to admit it, thought that the stranger was right, because the monk would definitely pretend that he didn't know him at all. After this, the guy wondered why a person like the head monk of the temple would share water from the spring with a representative of the demonic path. Sol Yun could not believe that his annoying acquaintance was the very same guest that the temple listeners had told him about. Looking at the guy, Sol Yun was horrified, as if he felt something was wrong. He decided that things were bad and quickly turned around and went about his business, leaving the suspicious man behind. The main character thought that he had to do something, and so he quickly wrote a letter in which he told about everything that had happened to him. He asked that this letter be delivered to Baekun from the White Tiger Division as quickly as possible. One of the temple servants agreed to carry out this assignment and took the letter. The stranger was still on the temple grounds playing with the dog, waiting for Sol Yun to finish her business. Somehow the stranger learned from the dog that the protagonist was not very friendly with the animal, and so they both agreed that the guy was an ice cube. Sol Yun was dumbfounded with surprise and was amazed that his obsessive acquaintance somehow understood what the animal was telling him. The boy set off on his journey again. The stranger followed him, saying along the way that Sol Yun had a rare name. He was interested in why the boy's parents named him that way. The protagonist assumed that they wanted him to become a great warang, since the words in his name came from the names of high-ranking representatives of the immortal path. The stranger was surprised at how deep the meaning of the main character's name was, but Sol Yun himself did not pay any attention to these words. After this, the intrusive acquaintance asked why the guy was silent, because he couldn't believe that he didn't want to know his name. An irritated Sol Yun replied that he was sure that the same dog named Baekun would definitely tell him about it next time. The stranger's mood noticeably improved after hearing this. He laughed and said that the main character was funny. Continuing my journey in the company of my annoying companion, Sol Yun thought that he was interested in how he would show himself in the capital. The satellites reached a dense forest with large trees called Karam. It was located not far from the capital. The stranger continued to follow the main character. He was surprised that they were in this forest because it seemed to him that the guy was heading to the Woolsong family. Sol Yun reluctantly answered that he first needed to look into Karam, after which he asked if his companion also had business with the Woolsons. Smiling good-naturedly, the stranger began to deny it, but suddenly remembered that he also had business in Karam. The main character, of course, did not believe this because he knew that the guy always followed him wherever he went. After this, Sol Yun thought that if Commander Baekun had already received his message, then the White Tiger Division should already be in Karam. The main character understood that he himself could not cope with the annoying stranger who possessed demonic energy, but he was sure that his comrades would be able to help him with this. The guy went further and further into the forest and suddenly heard someone's voices discussing the fact that Sol Yun had sent them urgent news. The main character was glad to hear these voices. The Blue Dragon Division commander named Seo Jiam approached Baekun and asked him if he really believed it. The commander of the Black Snake Turtle Division named Wu Won was dissatisfied with this secret meeting and believed that if the protagonist's prank harmed the White Tiger Division, then the whole of Warang would suffer. The Red Phoenix Division commander, who was Hua Wung, reminded Baekun that the protagonist was no longer Warang and therefore asked his comrade not to interfere in this matter. Sol Yong saw that in addition to all these commanders from other divisions, his closest comrades were also present. But still, the main character was very surprised that the commanders of all the divisions came to this forest. Then he heard one of the commanders say that if they had not gone with Baekun, the White Tiger Division would have fallen right into a trap. Some continued to be indignant and blamed Sol-yun for bringing an evil demon to the capital immediately after he left the division. Now the commander of the Blue Dragon Division, Seo Jae-im, was sure that the great prophet was right about the main character. Sun Ok began to justify her comrade and say that there was probably some explanation for all of this. Listening to all this, the main character thought that it was really suspicious to bring a demon to the capital, but the White Tiger Division had nothing to do with it, so he didn't want his comrades to listen to insults because of him. A stranger who also saw the division commanders approached the main character and ominously said that this was precisely why he did not trust him. The guy continued talking and was surprised that Seol-yun couldn't do anything with Hwarang but wanted to deal with the strange events. The stranger threatened that all division commanders would come to an end if he said just one phrase. Continuing to look the main character straight in the eyes and smile slyly, he added that even a simple cough would be enough for him to do this. The stranger said that he would now demonstrate this and coughed loudly once, which immediately attracted the attention of all the division commanders. Red Phoenix Division Commander Hwa Woong was surprised that Seol-yun had already arrived and greeted him. He looked at the man who was next to the main character and asked who it was. Everyone who was in the forest was stunned by surprise, as if they had seen something very scary. The commander of the Red Phoenix Division even dropped his fan from his hands in surprise. All the commanders immediately bowed respectfully to the stranger who came with Sol-yun and greeted him as the highest immortal. The main character was amazed and could not believe that his annoying acquaintance was a supreme immortal. The guy realized that if this was so, it meant that this man was the former captain of Hwarang. The stranger smiled at the main character and said that everything happened as he told him. One demon stood out among the others, terrifying them with his cruelty. For this, he was called the Great Catastrophe. He was a very powerful demon. Countless people died at his hands and Sarabial turned into a real hell. The then captain of Hwarang, whose name was Jaha, was called the embodiment of the brightest star Sirius. I keep hoping that he will be the one who saves all people from the terrible demon. The captain lived up to expectations and in a difficult battle he overcame the great disaster with his own forces. All the people wanted Jaha to continue leading Hwarang or to join the government and continue working for the nation. Despite all his achievements and skills, the captain did not desire power at all. That's why Jaha suddenly disappeared and was never seen again. The bright star of the war returned when things got bad again. Sol-yun continued to be surprised, and now I understand why his friend reacted that way. The protagonist remembered how the stranger denied his membership in the Golden Will Division, calling them idiots. The thing is that 8 years ago the name of this organization was different and was called the Sun and Moon Division. As a result of the Great Catastrophe, all members of the Luna Division died tragically and this part of the division ceased to exist. All that remained was the Sun, which was quickly renamed the Golden Will Division. The protagonist assumed that all the past years Jaha lived in isolation from the world and therefore did not know Seol-yun, and that he was called the Ghostly Demon King. The guy also suggested that the head monk of the temple gave the man water precisely because he recognized him immediately. Sol-yun thought that this version explained the suspicious behavior of her intrusive companion, but it still left questions. The main character still couldn't believe that the supreme immortal whom everyone loved so much was this psycho. The guy continued to think that Jaha hid the demonic energy so well that no one noticed anything and he himself could not reveal it now. Baek-eun turned to the supreme immortal and said that he had not changed a bit in these 8 years. Woo-won confirmed this and added that he remembered him as he was before. Hwa-woong said that everyone would be very happy when they learned of Jaha's return. The commander of the Blue Dragon motto began to say that the immortal should have warned at least them of his return. Hearing this, Jaha thought for a while and then said that he was sure that they were warned that a demon would come. Se-jae-im was immediately taken aback because he remembered what he had said not so long ago. He was indignant that the main character brought an evil demon to the capital immediately after leaving the division. Realizing that he had called the Supreme One an immortal demon, the commander of the Blue Dragon Division could not stay on his feet and fell to his knees. Se-jae-im tried to justify himself and say that he didn't mean it that way, but he was too nervous to find the words. The other commanders were silent and tried not to draw attention to you. The commanders of the White Tiger Division unanimously thought that Se-jae-im was indeed not at all to blame for expressing himself that way. The reason was that Seol-yun, who was still shocked by what was happening, wrote in his letter to Baek-un that a demon was heading towards the capital. The commanders did not understand why the protagonist named the supreme immortal demon and began to fear that some kind of conflict had arisen between the two of them. The rays of the bright sun barely passed through the thick branches of the centuries-old trees. The division commanders talked cheerfully with Jahan and reminisced about the past. The main character still hasn't accepted the fact that his annoying companion, who also possessed devilish energy, was the supreme immortal. The captains of the White Tiger Division noticed that Sol Yun was worried about something and therefore thought that the guy did not know that he had brought the supreme immortal with him. It was natural because the main character joined their ranks after Jaha left their organization. Turned out that all this was a big misunderstanding. The supreme immortal put on a serious expression and addressed the commanders. Jaha began to say that when he left the capital, they were all just boys. The man remembered that Seo Jiam always walked around with bandaged hands as if he had recently been in a fight, and Baek-un had swollen eyes. Woo-won was always biting his lips, which caused them to constantly bleed, and Woo-won smelled strongly of alcohol. Jin Rim, looking at all this, stood with a pale face and could not say anything. Jaha continued to remember that it was quite a sight, but even then he took an oath. That day the future division captain swore not to discredit the honor of the Kverens. The supreme immortal will go in for a while to find the right words and accurately express his thoughts. Jaha continued to say that he trusted his students and, leaving the division's affairs to them. Suddenly his expression changed, and he began to say that he never thought that the oaths of the current commanders would not last even a year. The Supreme Immortal said that he heard that all the divisions were helpless in the face of a 13-year-old boy. But what surprised the man most was that the boy became part of the Warangs and interrupted his asceticism. Sol Yun was not at all pleased to hear these words. The mood of the commanders immediately changed, and they looked at the main character with displeasure, as if blaming him for all the troubles. At the same time, the commanders of the White Tiger Division were shocked and very worried about their comrade. The Supreme Immortal then said that the protagonist was trying to figure out the anomalous events to prove that he was not a harbinger of bad things. But Jin Rim probably didn't believe him. The man mysteriously turned away and asked the commanders to think carefully about his words. Jaha continued to say that Sol Yun himself proposed such a solution and once personally reported on the situations that arose. But there was no one who could confirm his words. The commanders of the motto immediately looked at the main character with suspicion, because the words of the Supreme Immortal seemed true to them. Sol Yun was shocked and did not understand what Jaha was hinting at. After that, the guy thought that at this rate, the man would ruin the whole atmosphere and people would start sticking their noses into his affairs. Looking suspiciously at the Supreme Immortal, the protagonist wondered what he wanted to achieve with his speeches and what his true intentions were. Jaha stated that he had no other choice. The man pointed his finger at Sol Yun and declared that he would travel with him as an observer. The main character was shocked by this. I don't understand what the Supreme Immortal wanted. Jaha continued to say that of course he would like to continue living a comfortable life in isolation. But in such a situation there was nothing to do. The man said that he would serve as a representative of the top of Warang because he also had his own obligations and therefore he promised to take care of Sol Yun. All the division commanders immediately bowed respectfully to the Supreme Immortal, saying that the man was simply amazing. The main character remained standing straight, perplexed by what had happened. Black Snake Turtle Division Commander Woo-won was amazed that Jaha was actually willing to do anything for Warang and thanked him for it. The joyful commander of the Red Phoenix Division, Wa-un, was sure that their captain would be beside himself with the unit. At the same time, Sol Yun was very unhappy that an observer would be traveling with him and watching his every action. Looking at Jahan, the main character saw how he winked at him with one eye, as if saying that everything that had just happened was one big theatrical show. Sol Yun turned to Baek-un and said that he brought him water from a mountain spring. The commander thanked the guy and asked how he managed to get this water from the chief monk. To this, the main character only smiled and replied that he had his own ways. He mentally asked the commander not to ask any more unnecessary questions, because he did not want him to be left alone with Jahan, whom he considered a dangerous person. But no matter how much the guy didn't want it, Baek-un had already turned to the Supreme Immortal. The commander began to explain that Sol Yun had been through a lot because he needed time to open up to new people. So even if the guy was rude, he shouldn't have sat on him. Jaha was surprised but still agreed with this and said that he understood everything. Then the commanders of the White Tiger Division bowed respectfully to the Great Immortal and said that they were already leaving. Sol Yun looked with regret at his comrades who were leaving and leaving him alone with Jahan. After which the man asked what happened to Baekun. It seemed to him that even if the main character had stabbed him a couple of times, the commander would have only said that his subordinate was not very sociable. Jaha then asked why Seol Yun was silent and suggested that the boy still did not believe that he was the supreme immortal. The main character abruptly turned to face the man and began to deny it. He explained that he understood everything when he learned the true identity of his friend. After that, he said that he heard that the supreme immortal was able to overcome the great catastrophe alone. The guy continued to say that such an experience changed the very soul, and no matter how strong and fair a man was, after such an experience it was impossible to become the same again. Then the main character suggested that the supreme immortal could have changed for the worse. Jaha was struck by these words and continued to listen attentively to the guy. Sol Yun continued to say that it didn't bother him at all, but he only wanted to know why the man was doing this to him. The guy then said that if the man didn't like something, he could get rid of him, but apparently he had another reason to follow him. Smiling slyly and building up the atmosphere, the Supreme Immortal replied that the main character was completely right in his judgments. Jaha revealed that during the battle with the Great Disaster, the seeds of the demonic path took root in his heart, and he eventually accepted the demonic path. The man clenched his fist tightly and ominously declared that for the masters of demonic martial arts, only strength had a sign. A bequeathing aura was spreading around Jaha. The man was very concerned about the question of how to become even stronger. None of this frightened Sol Yun at all. The guy boldly looked straight into the eyes of the Great Immortal and noticed something. The man's eyes were exactly the same as those of those ghosts who wanted to kill the main character more than once. These were eyes full of envy for his strength. Sol Yun assumed a fighting stance and began to concentrate magical energy around himself, while asking the man if it was really all just a matter of strength. Jaha did not perceive the boy's intention to force a fight as a danger at all and therefore took a step towards him. Moments later, the man was already next to the main character and began to say that the guy's spiritual power was too great to belong to the Warangs. The Supreme Immortal grabbed Seol Yun's sword so that he could not use it. Jaha asked as the boy looked at him, killing him right now and absorbing his true energy from every vessel of his. The main character threatened that if the man killed him, he would become a powerful curse and would certainly take revenge on him. Looking angrily into the eyes of his opponent, the guy continued to say that he would fill each of his vessels with hatred for the man, so that he would certainly drink it along with his spiritual strength. In that case, the Great Immortal will die a painful death, experiencing pain as if he was being slowly cut with a blunt knife. Jaha only remained silent to these threats. Suddenly the man began to let go of the protagonist's sword, laughing and saying that he knew the guy would react this way. Jaha continued to say that this is why he will not kill Seol Yun. The Great Immortal explained that if the guy continued to solve all these strange phenomena alone without knowing one important fact, he would soon die anyway. Sol Yun was stunned and froze in place while the sounds of the man's footsteps went further and further into the forest. The main character did not understand at all what important fact the Great Immortal had just mentioned. After some time, the protagonist came to the hall in front of the tomb of King Jin Pyong, which was also known as the Monochrome Hall. The guy placed a small jade cylinder on the wooden table. The main character told his interlocutor that he came to him with a request. At that very moment, someone's hand with long, sharp claws emerged from under the curtain and took the jade for itself. The man hiding behind the screen was slightly dissatisfied and said that it was incomplete jade. He began to sort through it in his hands using spiritual energy, while asking what Sol Yun wanted to receive in return. The main character replied that he wanted to get something that he didn't have because it was broken. This interested the mysterious man. Sol Yun explained that he received something about 10 years ago from a Taoist. It looked like a piece of wood and attacked everything that was related to demons. This thing was not related to religion and did not contain the energy of heaven, so the guy was interested in whether his interlocutor would be able to work with it only based on the description. A hand appeared from behind the screen again, holding a small mirror. The man asked the main character to think in more detail about the appearance of this thing. Then Sol Yun touched the mirror, causing a small glow to appear. as if the main character had transferred his memories into it. At that very moment, a reflection of that very piece of wooden plate appeared in the mirror. Now the man knew what the thing the guy needed looked like. With a sinister smile, the man behind the curtain agreed and told the guy that he had accepted the order. The Supreme Immortal, who was engulfed in demonic energy, suddenly came to his senses when someone spoke to him. Jaha sat in the spacious room next to Captain Jean Rim. The captain said that the man had already done everything possible and no one would dare to demand more. But despite all this, he again came to the aid of the Warangs. The Supreme Immortal replied that he had no other choice, because he could not live peacefully when such turmoil was happening in the world. The man looked to the side at another person who was with them in the room. It was Sol Yun who looked at the Supreme Immortal with the gaze of an enraged white tiger, because he knew that the man was lying right now and was pursuing completely different goals. The guy remembered the man's words that if he continued to solve all the strange phenomena on his own without knowing one important fact, the main character thought about the fact that he had not slept at night because he was trying to understand what he could have missed and decided that a little later he would use any means to force the man to tell him everything. The captain approached him and praised Sol Yun for handling the incident related to the bloody rain. The man also said that, in addition to everything else, the guy met the highest immortal and received his help, which meant that the heavens took care of him because he was innocent. The guy reluctantly agreed with this. While pouring tea, Jean Rim hoped that nothing terrible would happen again and that the main character's innocence would be proven. But there was always one but. The man asked the Supreme Immortal if he knew that the prophecies of the Chief Prophet had not been wrong for the last 8 years. Jaha was surprised by this fact. The captain then asked how the man had managed to stay so well preserved, since he hadn't changed a bit in 8 years, and suggested that it was because he had been getting a good rest. Jaha started laughing and assumed that Jean Rim had decided to complain to him about the hard work and lack of rest. The captain immediately began to justify himself and said that everything was the other way around. The main character watched this and was unhappy with the fact that the Supreme Immortal was mocking the captain. After coming to his senses, Jean Rim said that he heard that the Supreme Immortal had not yet visited the heavenly abode and assumed that the man was planning to visit his family later. The captain then added that Jiaran was already carrying her third child. This immediately stunned the Supreme Immortal. The man silently looked at the captain, causing an ominous atmosphere to spread throughout the room. Jean Rim quickly realized that he had said too much and, apologizing, added that it was none of his business. Seol Yun was surprised by Jahan's reaction to these words and began to think about who that woman was. He remembered that it was the sister of the immortal who lost her first husband and then married a civil servant several years ago. Judging by the man's reaction, the guy assumed that they had been close before, but at the moment he had no soul, so their relationship was destroyed. The main character's guess was confirmed by the fact that the Supreme Immortal did not physically react to this news at all. After this conversation, Jaha went to the heavenly treasury to take one thing from there. The guy who worked there handed the man a sword and said that he knew he was coming, so he prepared it. Jaha happily took the weapon in his hands and, looking at it carefully, Sol Yun was closely watching all of this, hiding from the Supreme Immortal behind a tree. He became curious about where the man was rushing to, and it turned out that after talking with the captain he went straight to the treasury. Sol Yun knew that 8 years ago, when leaving the capital, the Supreme Immortal left her sword here, which had the name Nirvana. And now it seemed that the man had returned for it. The protagonist, who continued to watch Jahan, was very interested in whether he would now be able to remove the sheath from the sword. The treasurer said that the sword was magnificent and had to be returned to its owner. He then invited the man to look at it. Jaha was surprised by this proposal. He clearly did not want to draw his sword right here, but the guy insisted, saying that 8 years had already passed and it was worth checking. The Supreme Immortal tried to change the subject and said that the sword looked completely fine on the outside. Sol Yun immediately realized that the man was afraid to draw his sword after so many years. Nirvana was an alien and powerful sword that took many lives of demons. So the protagonist assumes that the man was in a hurry to take it so that the weapon would not reveal his true nature. Sol Yun was sure that this sword would never forgive its owner for going to the demonic path, and therefore as soon as the men got rid of the scabbard, there would be a commotion. A woman began to approach the treasury, surprised that the return of the Supreme Immortal turned out to be true. There was not a single sign of joy on her face, which led one to conclude that she was not at all happy to see Jahan. A woman in expensive clothing and surrounded by her subordinates addressed the Supreme Immortal. This woman was the same Supreme Prophet who predicted that the main character would become a harbinger of bad omens. Jaha recognized this woman, but from his appearance it seemed that he was also not happy to see his old acquaintance. For a while they looked at each other in silence, which created a tense atmosphere in the air. The Supreme Immortal looked at the Supreme Prophet as if he had some kind of unresolved conflict with her. The woman also looked the man straight in the eyes, trying to see in him proof of her rightness. The next moment she said that 8 years had already passed and she had accumulated many questions for the highest immortal, but they could wait because she wanted to ask him for a favor. The Supreme Prophet's subordinates immediately surrounded Jaha, not giving him a chance to escape. The woman rudely ordered the Supreme Immortal to expose Nirvana right here and now. Sol Yun was very surprised by this and continued to watch what was happening carefully because he wanted to see what would happen next. Jaha did not react to this order in any way and continued to keep his sword in its sheath, which the Supreme Prophet considered very strange. The woman continued to say that it didn't look like the highest immortal could physically do this, which meant the reason was something else. The Great Seer was the first among the prophets to see the prophecy of heaven and grandiose events for the entire people. Despite her youthful appearance, she was 60 years old. They said that she was a messenger from heaven and therefore did not age. She played a decisive role in the current emperor's accession to the throne, because they wanted to deprive him of his right to the throne, but the decision was overturned because he performed a ritual in honor of his ancestors, which she taught him. After this, the woman received the title of Great Seer for the first time in the history of the country, thanks to which she became an outstanding person with enormous influence. Not having received what she wanted, the woman again turned to the Supreme Immortal and asked if her request was so difficult. She didn't understand why the man hesitated and ordered him to draw his sword from its sheath and purify the divine relic of the heavenly spiritual power. Looking angrily at the annoying woman, Jaha asked why he had to obey her orders. Hearing this question, the Great Seer considered that the man's reaction was very suspicious. She threatened that if he did not do this, she would report that the Supreme Immortal was unable to wield a sword, after which she turned to her subordinate, making it clear that he needed to go to the captain. The main character continued to observe all this, hiding behind a tree and not attracting attention to himself. He was surprised that the Great Seer suspected the man and thought that she was able to notice things that were said from the captain's gaze. Judging by Jaha's expression, he clearly didn't want the information about him not being able to control the ball to spread. The Supreme Immortal said that it was not worth distracting His Majesty with all sorts of trifles and agreed to do what the Great Seer asked him to do. Jaha took hold of the sword's hilt and began to slowly draw the divine relic from its sheath. The woman carefully watched this action, which was exciting for her, because she understood that now her guess could be confirmed. The Supreme Immortal was in no hurry to draw his sword and watched the Great Seer's reaction closely. The main character watched all this with bated breath, not believing that the man had actually put off doing this. The guy thought that there was no better time to reveal Jahan's demonic nature. Sol Yun understood that this would untie the hands of the seer and she would interfere in the affairs of Warang, and this could not be allowed. Meanwhile, the Supreme Immortal still had not drawn his sword from its sheath, but was preparing to do so with his hand on the hilt. The protagonist felt that he had no other choice, and so he decided to prevent the man from getting his sword and using his talisman of spiritual energy. The Supreme Immortal smiled slyly, as if he had some kind of plan and was going to put it into action immediately. The man began to slowly take out his sword, and the sharp blade immediately began to reflect the rays of the sun. As Jaha exposed more and more of the sword's blade, the bright glow grew larger and blinded the people watching the process. The next moment a strong wind arose which knocked the subordinates of the Great Seer off their feet. Jaha completely pulled out his sword from the need, causing divine energy to strike him with a dense beam of bright light. The great province, not afraid of being blinded by the bright light, looked attentively at the Supreme Immortal and could not believe its eyes. The protagonist was also amazed that the man managed to pull out the sword without revealing that he possessed demonic energy. The guy didn't understand what had happened and didn't believe that Jahan had managed to deceive even this force. Sol Yun continued to look at the Supreme Immortal, not believing that the sword obeyed him unquestioningly. After this, the man turned to the great province and asked if her curiosity had been satisfied, since he had a lot to do and he needed to go already. The woman did not respond to this, but only looked at her subordinate, who was holding his head because it hurt after such a bright flash of light. The great seer was very unhappy that her guess was not confirmed, which is why she clenched her teeth. Still, the woman admitted that she was mistaken, after which she took several steps forward towards the Supreme Immortal. She continued to say that so much time had passed that she had forgotten that the man knew no fear. Approaching Jahan, the woman said that there were still things that could not be ignored. With anger on her face, she said that terrible events would continue to happen, and because of Jahan's wrong choice, people would die. Sol Yun also heard the woman say that those who recklessly turned a blind eye to the heavenly prophecies and did not punish the harbinger of bad things would pay for their sins. The great province threatened the man that he would still receive his punishment, just like last time. After thinking about these words for a while, the Supreme Immortal rudely replied that it would be better for outsiders not to meddle in other people's business. After that, the man headed to the market, which was located in the southern district, keeping a small distance behind him, with Sol Yun following close behind. Walking past the merchant's stalls, the guy thought about where the Supreme Immortal was heading. The main character continued to closely follow the man, not understanding what business he might have had in this market. The guy was distracted from these thoughts by an unexpected collision with a man who was carrying a large statue of Buddha on his back. Having come to his senses, Sol Yun began to look around, because he could not find the Supreme Immortal in the crowd of people. For some time the guy nervously looked into the faces of passers-by, not understanding where the man could have gone. Sol Yun couldn't believe that he had lost him and continued his desperate attempts to find Jahan. The next moment, a familiar voice was heard behind the main character, saying that he was not mistaken and it was much more interesting when someone was watching him and not the other way around. The guy began to quickly turn around to face the higher immortal, not understanding how he managed to end up behind him. The main character took out his talisman and, putting it to the man's chest, immediately used it, which created a bright flash of light. Jaha narrowed his eyes and asked the guy what he was planning to do, but he quickly realized it himself. Sol Yun grabbed the Supreme Immortal sword and began to quickly draw it from its sheath. He put a sharp blade to his neck, making it clear that the man should not make any rash movements. This act really made Jahan stand still and listen to what the protagonist had to say. Looking angrily at the Supreme Immortal, the guy reminded him of his own words that he had said in Karam. A man told the boy that if he continued to solve all the strange phenomena alone without knowing one important fact, he would soon die. The sword presented to the neck had already wounded the main character, but he continued to say that he should have known what an important fact he had overlooked. All this could not fail to attract the attention of ordinary people who were at the market. They were scared and did not understand what the guy was doing. Sol Yun did not pay attention to this and threatened the man that if he did not answer, he would commit suicide and then become a vengeful spirit by inhabiting this sword. The Supreme Immortal only laughed, appreciating Sol Yun's antics with dignity. Sol Yun put a sharp sword to his neck and threatened Jahan that if he did not tell everything, he would commit suicide and then become a vengeful spirit by inhabiting this sword. The Supreme Immortal only laughed, appreciating Sol Yun's antics with dignity. People who watched this from the side quietly whispered among themselves, not understanding what the main character was doing. Suddenly the great immortal turned around and said that he had no idea who this guy was. People began to get indignant and asked the man to stop Sol Yun, because they were afraid that the guy was about to commit suicide. Seeing the discontent of the people, Jaha realized that they would not let him leave peacefully, and so he turned back to the main character and addressed him. Without hiding his indignation, the man called the guy a scoundrel and asked what he was doing, after which he ordered him to give up his sword. However, Sol Yun insisted on his own and said that he was not joking. The great immortal silently looked at the main character, hoping that he would finally come to his senses. But the guy did not let go of the sword, showing that his intentions were quite serious and he was ready to carry out his plan at any second. Still, the man began to laugh and say that he would tell Sol Yun everything. The people who had gathered from all over the market square were surprised at what was happening. Jaha asked the guy if he was really that interested and promised that he would tell him everything, but it wouldn't change anything for him. Sol Yun began to be indignant that the man thought that even after knowing the whole truth, the guy would still screw up. After that, he again ordered Jahan to immediately tell everything. The Supreme Immortal snatched his sword from the protagonist's hands. It seemed that now the guy would never get answers to his questions. But the man was still ready to tell everything. But first they had to do something. This surprised Sol Yun. Then the Supreme Immortal asked the protagonist to follow him, after which they wandered along the empty streets. People who had been watching this all this time were surprised by this outcome and did not understand what had just happened. They quickly became bored with thinking about this, and so people returned to their usual activities as if nothing had happened. The Supreme Immortal noticed that people no longer paid attention to him, and so he could relax. He explained to the guy that if Nirvana turned into a mystical spirit and became attached to the main character, then Warang would get rid of it by uniting it with himself. Then Sol Yun asked why the Supreme Immortal was so scared, after which he remembered that they had to do something before the man would tell him everything. The Supreme Immortal did not continue this conversation and, letting the guy go, hid his sword back in its sheath. Setting off on their journey, the man explained that, of course, first they needed to look around the market. Sol Yun was very surprised by this and realized that Jaha had deceived him. A little girl ran up to a gentleman passing by and, smiling good-naturedly, asked if he wanted to buy some incense. Jaha thought for a moment and then said that he knew little about incense. The girl began to show small bags and said that in one of them there was cedar and in the other an orchid. The man thought that in this case he would take everything that she had. The main character came out and stood behind the immortal and thought about something meticulously while waiting for him. Looking at the man's sword, the guy noticed that there was no yin-yang pendant on it. This pendant symbolized status among the Warang and could easily be used to tell if its owner had been defiled. The guy continued to think that no one simply dared to tell the Supreme Immortal to put his pendant back on. While the main character was thinking about this, the man put his purchases in his hands. Having come to his senses and seeing all this in your hands, the main character made a displeased face as if saying that he was not a servant. Jaha smiled and said that the war bird and the troublesome Warang were a good duo. Sol Yun didn't understand why the Supreme Immortal needed all these old things. The man continued to say that birds have always been man's friends who guided his soul. In this regard, Jahan remembered a phrase that said that the living will serve Yen as their master, and the dead, in turn, will serve Yin. To this, the main character replied that even on the moon, which was the personification of Yin, there were monsters. Jaha agreed with this. The man headed to the next merchant, leaving behind a confused Sol Yun. The guy followed the Supreme Immortal along the way, wondering if he really thought that he would give up if he decided to test him. Jaha said that he wanted to know something from the boy regarding the moment when he pretended that he couldn't draw his sword in front of the Great Seer. The Supreme Immortal directly asked what Sol Yun was trying to do standing behind that tree. The main character remembered that moment very well, but was in no hurry to give his answer, silently walking behind the man. He decided to clearly show what he was going to do then and took out his spiritual energy talismans. Jaha silently looked at the talisman, which began to glow brightly from one touch of the main character. The Supreme Immortal asked if it was really just the light with which the boy had taken the sword from him not long ago. Sol Yun confirmed this and said that it was a shining talisman. The boy explained that at that time he thought that the man would not be able to draw his sword and therefore wanted to use a beam of light to deceive the great ruler. Jaha was surprised by this answer and asked why the guy wanted to deceive the great seer. The protagonist explained that the problems of the Warangs had to be solved among the Warangs. The Supreme Immortal was very surprised by this answer, which made him dumbfounded and his face froze in an incomprehensible smile. The man laughed at the main character and continued walking forward, leaving Sol Yun to wonder what was funny about his words. The guy said that at that time the Great Seer could not have known that the man had entered the demonic path. Therefore, the main character was very interested in why the woman was so sure that the Supreme Immortal would not be able to draw his sword. Jaha thought that the Great Seer had simply foreseen this or seen something in his face. The man continued to say that the woman didn't like anything at all. She hated money, art, handsome men, and the only thing she liked was power. The day was drawing to a close and the sun was giving off its last rays of light before setting beyond the horizon. Some man was loudly telling a story about how the hero hurried to go around the tower to admire the beauty's face once again. A crowd of people gathered around the man to listen to this story. This attracted the attention of a supreme immortal who was passing nearby with the main character. After listening for a while to the story that the man was telling, Jaha remembered that it was a story about a ghost of a tower. Suddenly, the supreme immortal asked Sol-yun what he thought was the most important thing in a good scary bedtime story. The main character, without any enthusiasm, suggested that the most important thing was the presence of ghosts in the story. Jaha sighed in disappointment because this was the wrong answer. This got on the guy's nerves, so he started saying that a good horror story should be relatable to everyone. Sol-yun thought that this sounded pretty cool, but the man again said that this answer was wrong. After some time, Sol-yun I was at the table in the establishment and was irritated by the fact that the supreme immortal gave such an explanation to his question. Jaha looked around and was surprised that this establishment had not changed at all over the years, although the staff was completely different. Sol-yun drank tea silently and thought about how the man had been sucking energy out of him all day, almost like a real ghost. The supreme immortal sarcastically asked whether the guy was dying of impatience or was simply tormented by thirst. The intrigued guy immediately put the cup on the table and asked what was already the most important thing in a good scary story for the night. The supreme immortal suggested that the protagonist think about this question himself, after which he asked what he saw on the faces of those listeners. Sol-yun recalled that the people were focused and excited. After that, he added that the incident in the Sky Gallery in which the man participated could also be called quite frightening. Suddenly, the Supreme Immortal asked why the people weren't excited that time. This question left Sol-yun stumped. The man continued to reason that it seemed like it was the same horror story, but for some reason people's reactions were so different. The main characters thought for a bit and answered that it was because everything happened in reality. Hearing this, the Supreme Immortal smiled sincerely, because this was exactly the answer he wanted to get from the guy. The man explained that scary stories only made people laugh when they had a reality to return to. But when this barrier collapsed, the horror stories became real horror. The guy thought that the whole point was that the horror story happened in reality. After that, he asked the Supreme Immortal why he was saying all this. The man calmly explained that he said all this so that next time everything would happen exactly the same way. Having heard the surface, was shocked and was dumbfounded and could not even utter a word. Jaha lowered his hand into the water as if he was trying to find something at the bottom of the lake. Holding the purchases of the Supreme Immortal in his hands, stood humbly and waited for the man to examine his find. He was very surprised when he saw that it was a wooden tablet for rituals in honor of the Dragon King. Jaha thought that people shouldn't throw things like that here. The wooden tablet began to shine brightly thanks to the spiritual energy that the Supreme Immortal used. Throwing the sign back into the water, the man remembered the saying that the mountains and the landscape were pleasing to the eye no matter how far away they were. Walking along the evening streets, Jaha told the main character that the Warangs trained Taoism through the essence of nature. If someone suffered, they would always come to the rescue, overcoming any obstacles. The man continued to say that even if demons or ghosts caused trouble, they could be suppressed with fighting power and a sword. The Supreme Immortal was confident that this time everything would be different. Sol-yun silently listened to the man's words without trying to argue with him. Suddenly the guy asked if the Supreme Immortal meant that everything would happen the same way as with the Great Catastrophe. Looking at the main character and smiling slyly, Jaha did not give a specific answer to this question, saying that no one knew. Then the guy remembered that a little earlier the man had said that the horrible story would repeat itself in reality. Sol-yun asked if this was what the Great Seer was referring to in her prophecy. The Supreme Immortal again answered without specifics, saying that perhaps this was so. Then the guy asked how he knew about this. The man suggested that he also had the ability to see the future. Jaha called the main character a fool and said that it could be called a theory or intuition, but he always relied only on his knowledge and experience. Sol-yun asked why then the horror story had to be repeated in real life. The Supreme Immortal replied that it was not he who decided to delve into all the strange incidents and considered that the guy should figure it out himself. There was a night of silence, which was only occasionally broken by the rustling of tree branches. Jaha silently approached the large gates that fenced off the estate from outsiders. Sol Yun slightly raised his head and noticed what was depicted on the gate. In the light of the moon, the image of the demigoddess Isvara, who was the spirit of clouds and water, shone on the gate. The main character wondered what this was a house and why the Supreme Immortal had some business here. Suddenly, the guy remembered how the captain said that the man still had not visited the heavenly abode. Jaha turned to the main character and asked in surprise if he really wanted to go into the estate with him. The guy began to deny it. The Supreme Immortal did not listen to Sol Yun at all and, entering the estate, said that he would now ask if the guy could enter. After this, joyful voices of people were heard outside the gates, greeting the gentleman and asking him to pass quickly. At that very moment, the main character realized that this was the residence of the Supreme Immortal. Very soon the gates began to open again and Jaha appeared in them, asking the guy what they were supposed to do. The man explained that he had spoken to the people but had received the answer that they would be very uncomfortable in the company of the ghostly demon king. No one had forbidden him to enter, but they could not allow him to roam freely around the territory. Then the Supreme Immortal suggested locking the main character somewhere if he didn't mind. Sol Yun only thought that there was no point in listening to the man. The main character was about to leave, but suddenly remembered Jahan's purchases, which he had been holding in his hands all this time, and asked what he was supposed to do with them. The guy couldn't get an answer because the Supreme Immortal had already disappeared beyond the gates of the estate. Sol Yun was left completely alone at night with his things and the Immortal and did not know what to do. I think that the men were somehow suspicious of Sol Yun who left things at the gate. The main character continued to think that he had had enough for today and that he had learned enough information. After that, the guy started to leave, thinking that tomorrow he definitely needed to look into the heavenly gallery. The next day came. The main character stood at the gate and humbly waited for someone. Sol Yun thought about what he learned yesterday and how he would now tell all of this to the people he was waiting for. Someone addressed the guy, causing him to immediately interrupt his thoughts and turn in the direction from which the voice came. These were the commanders of the White Tiger Division who cheerfully walked towards the main character and greeted her. Approaching the guy, Sun Ok immediately asked why he was so pale. Haiwul assumed that the main character had slept poorly and asked where he had spent the night. Sol Yun replied that he had stopped near the Yellow Dragon Temple and asked his comrades not to worry about him. After that, he said that he wanted to tell them something. Baek-un immediately became alarmed, assuming that something had happened. The main character began to deny this and said that he only wanted the commanders to be careful. At the same time, the guy thought that he had little trust in the Supreme Immortal and therefore extra caution would not hurt. The main character said that he had information regarding the strange events that the Great Seer had foreseen. She said that the rest of the incidents would also be recreations of scary stories, similar to the incident in the Sky Gallery. This is why the main character was going to start his investigation. The division commanders were very surprised and asked if the great government had really said that. Sol Yun confirmed this and said that therefore his comrades needed to be extremely careful and immediately tell him if something similar happened to them. Baek-un agreed with the main character because he trusted him completely. After that he said that the mission was obviously not easy because the guy looked very tired, so he should have let me know if he needed anything. Hyo-wul suggested that it was probably cool when the Supreme Immortal Seol Yun walked with the main character. He thought that he was glad that it was the demon who walked with him and not with them. After some time, the main character, as planned earlier, arrived at the heavenly gallery. The boy turned to the palace servants and asked if they had all the masks that people wore that night. Two girls who were dressed in bright yellow outfits immediately confirmed this. They then said that they kept them in one of the rooms, after which they led Sol Yun inside the gallery. Someone was watching this closely. The two girls who were also palace servants were discussing what the protagonist could have forgotten here, assuming that he was investigating about the demon in the heavenly gallery. Someone turned to them and asked if Sol Yun was already inside the gallery. The girls immediately turned around to look at the man who asked them the question. The palace servants were shocked to see the Supreme Immortal in front of them, and for some time they could not answer his question. The palace servants led Jahan to the territory of the Sky Gallery, where the investigation regarding the recent incident with the demon was still underway. Sol Yun was already inside, carefully checking the room where it all began. The main character thought that the palace servants got rid of everything during the renovation, and that is why now he felt nothing. The guy also managed to question the manager who sold the masks, but his soul was pure because he was not connected with the incident. The protagonist was distracted from these thoughts by the noise in the street. People greeted the Supreme Immortal. Jaha crossed the threshold of the gallery and entered the room. Smiling as always, the man looked at Sol Yun and began to approach him. Jaha asked how the investigation was progressing and whether the main character had managed to find anything. Sol Yun was not at all happy to see the Supreme Immortal and therefore did not answer his question. Jaha asked what was wrong with the guy's face and suggested that he shouldn't have come here. Sol Yun replied that there was nothing like that because he assumed that this would happen. Then the dissatisfied protagonist asked how he should have reacted to the demon who was pursuing him like a predator pursuing its prey. But this Supreme Immortal said with a smile on his face that instead of complaining, the guy should have looked for more clues, otherwise he wouldn't understand anything. Sol Yun started to get angry and asked what kind of nonsense the man was talking about. Suddenly, he saw Jaha pointing his finger to the side. The main character saw palace servants who clearly really wanted to know what their conversation was about. Sol Yun immediately calmed down and decided that he should have watched his words. This situation greatly amused the Supreme Immortal, who could hardly hold back his laughter. One of the female servants approached the main character and wanted to tell him something. Looking unkindly at the girl, Sol Yun asked her if she had anything to say. The appearance of the main character, which seemed dangerous, frightened the servant, which made her nervous and did not know how to say what she wanted. Jaha was very surprised at how Sol Yun behaved with other people. The man began to smile again and asked the main character to be gentler with the girl because she was nervous and suggested that he first find out her name. Sol Yun thought that the man really was a real demon because he could so easily hide his true appearance and appear kind to people. Still, Sol Yun believed that the Supreme Immortal was right and therefore calmed down and tried to be more friendly. Finally, she turned to the girl and asked her name. This time, the guy didn't seem dangerous. The attendant replied that her name was Gabby and said that she had something to tell him. The girl began to say that the situation was very strange, and that is why they found out about everything that happened that day. She then asked if the main character remembered a girl named Yum who got up that day possessed by Sol Yun. He answered in the affirmative. Gabby continued to say that Yum, not long before what happened, said that she saw some woman at the entrance. Sol Yun was surprised by this and suggested that this woman could be from the residence of the prophet. Gabby did not know about this for sure. The girl then said that Yum only mentioned that this woman inspired fear and that an aura that seemed inhuman emanated from her. The main character thought that before everything happened, some woman appeared who should not have been on the territory of the heavenly gallery. Sol Yun said that Yun didn't remember meeting that woman or telling her friend about it. So it turned out that Gabi's words were the only ones he had. Looking at the Supreme Immortal, the main character assumed that this woman could be a ghost or a demon. Suddenly the guy saw something that made him immediately forget about his thoughts and looked away in surprise. He noticed that the expression on the Supreme Immortal's face was somehow unusual again. Jaha started to leave the gallery saying that he would look around outside. Sol Yun assumed that this whole story had affected the man for some reason. Soon the main character also went outside and suddenly felt something strange. The guy held in his hand 2 halves of an artifact he had just dug out of the ground and thought that it was a zodiac scripture of 4 deities. The main character knew that this was a relic of the Waran, so he was very interested in who could have buried it here. The voice of the Supreme Immortal was heard behind the guy, saying that it was he who buried the artifact here. From this suddenness, a shudder ran through the guy's body. Approaching Sol Yun, the Supreme Immortal asked why he was so afraid. Then he asked the guy if he wasn't curious about who buried the Warang artifact here. Sol Yun didn't answer. After some time, the main character still asked when the Supreme Immortal did this. The man answered that before leaving the capital. This was followed by the next question. Sol Yun asked why the man did this. Jaha seemed to regretfully answer that he did it so that everything would return to normal. Sol Yun looked at the Supreme Immortal with confusion, because he didn't understand what he was talking about. Still, the main character believed the man and said that it was done before he plunged into the demonic path, so he admitted that it was done out of good intentions. But at the same time, Sol Yun did not understand why the Warang artifact was split, and so the guy concentrated his spiritual energy in order to find clues. The main character could not feel anything and began to wonder what could destroy the divine religion without leaving a trace. Then the guy said that he could not determine who broke the artifact and took it with him because the damaged drachma instrument could attract evil. The Supreme Immortal did not argue with this and said that Sol Yun could do whatever he wanted with the broken relic. The guy put a protective talisman in the hole where the main character found the artifact in order to protect this place from evil forces. Sol Yun turned to the Supreme Immortal and asked if he had buried anything else, to which he received a lengthy answer. The main character immediately asked where the man had buried Jaha and began pointing with his finger at all the places where he had once buried something. There were quite a few such places. Jaha continued to remember and show everything that the perplexed protagonist asked him about for some time. Having made a whole list of such places, Sol Yun was surprised and said that the Supreme Immortal had not sat idle in his time. The man agreed with this. It took our heroes some time to dig up and check all the hidden relics. Finally, the work was finished and the Supreme Immortal summed up that only the zodiacal scripture of the 4 deities was broken. The main character asked the man if he had any idea what kind of woman the servant Yum was talking about. But this Supreme Immortal only remained silent as if he did not know or did not want to answer the truth. Suddenly our heroes heard the loud voice of a man who swore unevenly that he was not lying and his words were the purest truth. Sol Yun and the Supreme Immortal immediately turned their attention to the man who was standing not far from them. The soldiers of the Golden Will Division asked the manager to calm down and assured that the captain would immediately send people. The man continued to be nervous and say that it was necessary to immediately sort out that story about the ghost because the people had already begun to leave them. The man continued to say that he agreed with the plot of the painting Images of Paradise, that in one night dozens of people would lose their lives. Hearing this, our heroes were struck by lightning from surprise. 100 years ago there lived a brilliant artist. He was born into a peasant family but had incredible talent. This talent consisted in the fact that everything in his paintings seemed too alive. There was no end to the buyers of his works. People said that the artist's paintings were so realistic that they could deceive even ghosts. One day the artist received an order from a wealthy man who asked him to depict the Western paradise of Buddha on the largest wall of his house. The man wanted to feel as if he was inside a painting while in the room. Soon the artist got to work. He put all his strength and talent into this painting, but soon disaster struck. The artist's only son died suddenly at a very young age. From the grief he experienced, the creator's mind began to distort, changing the artist beyond recognition. He abandoned everything that had surrounded him before except the painting. The artist did not eat or sleep. Day after day he lost his mind, lost touch with reality, but still continued his work. As soon as the artist completed his painting, he immediately met his inevitable end. The owner of the house received guests and decided to show them the painting. It was then that the terrible incident happened. The painting suddenly came to life and began to attack people. The thing was that a demon had entered the painting. The characters came off the canvas and dealt with all the people in that room with particular cruelty. The family of the owner of this house and his guests were killed on that fateful night. Such was the terrifying story of the painting called the Image of Paradise. After hearing in the heavenly gallery, the protagonist and Supreme Immortal went to the residence of the Crimson Flower. The man was indignant that the cherry tree was covered with white flowers when it bloomed, but the name of this place indicated a crimson color, considering that this was a complete deception and this place should have been called the Residence of Cherry Picking. Jaha continued to say that another nightmare had come true and therefore Sol Yun would not have to be bored. The guy didn't react to this and remembered the words of the great seer who said that His Majesty gave him a task that he had to complete alone to prove his innocence. The main character also remembered well that if he screwed up, he would be executed. The Supreme Immortal considered that this was indeed a problem, but it would only benefit him. The main character stood still and asked the talkative Jahan to be silent. After this, the guy fell to one knee and bowed his head. The Supreme Immortal immediately asked what his companion was doing. Having received no answer, the man assumed that the main character was trying to appear cool. Sol Yun immediately began to deny it. Continuing to make strange movements, Sol Yun explained that he was trying to detect demon energy. The guy also said that usually it could be felt in places where demons were running amok, But here he felt nothing, which showed how strong and ominous the picture was. The Supreme Immortal asked how the protagonist was going to deal with this matter. Sol Yun replied that the artist's creation would have to be destroyed, but the guy remained silent about the people whom the painting had already taken. He thought that if the painting needed a victim to obtain life energy, then most likely these people were already dead. After all, several days had already passed. The main character stated that they needed to find the bodies of the victims no matter what it cost. Jaha was surprised by this. Then the Supreme Immortal warned that if the guy went there, he too would have a not very pleasant meeting. Sol Yun didn't agree with this because he was sure that all the demons had already hidden in the corners. A menacing man stood in the protagonist's way and did not let the guy go forward. Sol Yun looked ahead in surprise, not understanding why he was not allowed to go inside. At the gate stood the commander of the Black Turtle Snake Division, Wu Won, blocking the path of the protagonist. The man looked at Sol Yun with displeasure, as if he didn't want to see him there at all. The commanders from different divisions looked at each other in silence, not wanting to start a conversation. Sol Yun bowed to Wu Wa and greeted him, thinking along the way that he had met the enemy at the most inopportune moment. The Black Snake Turtle Division commander still looked at the protagonist with suspicion and didn't even greet him. He bowed low to the Supreme Immortal and said that he was glad to see him. The man replied that it had not been easy to get here. Wu Won said that they found the evil spirit of the artist who was responsible for everything that happened and sealed him. As soon as this was done, all activity ceased from the painting. The commander also believed that it was necessary to destroy the wall along with the painting in order to save people, but so far they had not been able to do this. After that, Yu Won bowed again to the Supreme Immortal and said that he had to leave this place because he still had his own business in the Jaha division. The commander wished him a safe journey. The commander of the Black Snake Turtle Division left the main character and the Supreme Immortal, giving them the opportunity to explore everything here themselves. Sol Yun watched Wu Won leave and felt relieved. The protagonist was still unhappy with the meeting with the commander of the Black Snake Turtle Division, and therefore looked after him with disdain. Jaha noticed this and said that he knew that the guy's relations with the other divisions were quite tense, but apparently with the Black Snake Turtle Division, everything was extremely bad. The Supreme Immortal was very interested in what the reason for this was and what could have happened between Wu Won and Sol Yun. The main character replied that he was not obliged to answer, and besides, he had more important things to do than discuss his personal relationships. The man continued to insist, saying that he was interested. For some time our heroes walked around the residence of the Crimson Flower. We need to find out more information about what happened. The second in command of the Black Snake Turtle Division named Chung Peng greeted Sol Yun and said that he heard that the boy would be coming here. The protagonist asked if it was true that they had sealed the evil spirit of the artist Chung Peng, and he replied that at least that was what he had been told. The commander said that the spirit was discovered by his subordinates who were the first to arrive here. The spirit had an extremely sickly appearance and in one of his hands he held brushes, so it was decided that this was the same artist who lived 100 years ago. Sol Yun thought that it was strange, because for such a massacre someone had to sacrifice their soul. In that case, it was unclear why the artist's soul was still here. After this, our heroes questioned the manager, who said that it all started about a month ago when some kind of picture began to appear on the wall. When someone passed by her at night, she tried to harm the person, but so far everything turned out not to be so bad. In addition, there was a wedding coming up, so the manager simply kept quiet about it. The newlyweds' relatives arrived at the establishment, and just at that time a terrible event occurred. People cried loudly, not understanding why this wall had not yet collapsed and where their children and loved ones were. Sol Yun saw this and thought that grief, hatred and self-flagellation only fed in energy and were food for evil spirits, so it was necessary to calm people down first. Suddenly, the main character felt that varying energy and turned sharply in the direction in which it seemed to be inordinately abundant. The guy saw the Supreme Immortal who was calmly standing in the corner of the room. A powerful aura was spreading from him in all directions. Sol Yun was shocked by what he saw and realized that he had made a mistake in letting Jahan in. Smiling slyly, the man said thoughtfully that he felt strange now, but he felt very good. The main character saw the Supreme Immortal who was calmly standing in the corner of the room. A radiant aura was spreading from him in all directions. Sol Yun was shocked by what he saw and realized that he had made a mistake in letting Jahan in. Smiling slyly, The man said thoughtfully that he felt strange now, but he felt very good. Sol Yun immediately headed towards the Supreme Immortal. Thinking along the way about how he managed to get through the whole thing, he was distracted for a second. Without choosing his words, loudly demanded that Ja get out of here immediately. This greatly surprised the man, who was not used to someone addressing him like that. The Black Snake Turtle Division members who also heard this were shocked and couldn't believe that the protagonist actually said such a thing to a Supreme Immortal. Seol Yun immediately realized that he had done wrong and attracted unnecessary attention. So he lied and said that he had sensed a ghost or something similar. Jaha explained that he was standing there because he was in a good mood. The protagonist pretended to believe the man. After this, the guy, once again going on business, asked the Supreme Immortal not to go far and to be close to him. Walking past the room where the relatives of the painting's victims were grieving, the guy thought that because of this, the energy in the house had increased. This prevented the main character from getting rid of the evil spirit, and so he decided that first of all it was necessary to cleanse the yin energy. Turning to Chong Pun, the guy asked him to take all the people away from here because he wanted to calm the family members of the missing. The man did not understand how Sol Yun was going to calm them down because no one was listening to him because they were so consumed with grief. Then he asked the guy if he had any plan. Jaha watched closely as the protagonist turned to the people and told them that the painting Image of Heaven was harming the people. The guy continued to say that unfortunately, for days had already passed since the people went missing and therefore most likely they were already dead. The relatives of the missing could not believe it, and one of the women began to insist that she had definitely heard their voices. Sol Yun responded to this by saying that the woman could not be sure whether these were the voices of real people or ghosts pretending to be them. These words did not calm people down at all, but on the contrary only worsened the situation. The Supreme Immortal turned to the protagonist and asked what it was, because he simply sprinkled salt on their fresh wounds. Sol Yun began to deny it and said that he was just trying to help these people. The main character began to assure that each of the people present here hoped for a successful outcome. But with their words they only gave power to the evil that was in the picture, so the guy asked people to hate them. Sol Yun said that he would let them know if their family members were alive, so he asked people to calm down and dry him off. After some time, the main character prepared several talismans on bright yellow paper. People who watched the guy work were surprised that the Warangs resorted to shamanism, because only shamans used such things. Smiling kindly, the Supreme Immortal asked the people not to be so surprised, because this was only the beginning. At the same time, the members of the Black Snake Turtle Division perceived what was happening with dissatisfaction. After the required number of talismans were ready, the main character folded his hands in front of him. Using his spiritual power and skills, Sol Yun was able to cause the talismans to turn into small paper rats. The guy seemed to start whispering to the rats, simultaneously releasing spiritual energy from himself. The paper rats understood everything and immediately ran around the room to carry out the main character's order. Sol Yun explained to everyone that he asked if there were people inside the walls and if the rats found them, then, after returning, they would shine using the life force of the victims. Jaha suggested that it was a strange art of the 12 zodiacs. The guy replied that, in fact, it was a sacred art of the zodiacs, because only God could see both people and ghosts. After some time, all the paper rats returned, but none of them shone. People fell into despair because they were now sure that their relatives had died due to the tricks of ghosts. Chong Pun thought that since people finally learned the truth about their relatives, they could now calm down. The Supreme Immortal looked at the paper rats running across the floor and suddenly noticed something, but was in no hurry to tell the main character about it. But there was no need to do this because Sol Yun himself had already felt something. The guy realized that the power of the painting was great and was able to weaken his magic. The main character took out his sword and made a small cut in order to get his blood. Seol Yun clenched his bleeding hand into a fist and began to drip blood onto the floor. Drops of his blood fell on the paper rats, who had acquired armor and now looked like generals. The guy explained that he had given the rats a power superior to the energy of the painting, and so he would try to send them out to search again. People really hoped that it would work. After some time, one of the rat generals returned, but this time she was shining. She approached one of the relatives of the missing, thanks to which the man immediately realized that his mother was alive. After some time, all the rats returned and stopped in front of the people, which meant that all the missing were alive. This could not but please their relatives. Seeing this result, the main character assumed that the people were being held somewhere and therefore it was necessary to help them. The Supreme Immortal was surprised that all the people were alive and did not understand how this was possible. Sol Yun asked if the man had thought about hiding his evil side at least a little. After that, the guy thought about it and decided that the fact that people were alive was good news, but really strange, so he needed to check something. Sol Yun turned to Jahan again and said that in any case, he had completed this task. Zhang Peng explained to his students that such tricks might impress ordinary people. But the true path of Hwarang consisted of training and killing ghosts. Our heroes heard a loud explosion that sounded very close to them. The guy immediately looked to the side and thought that it was one of the techniques of the Black Snake Turtle Division. Sol Yun immediately looked at Zhang Puna to ask him questions. But unexpectedly their eyes met. Out of awkwardness, the representatives of the two different divisions immediately turned away so as not to look each other in the eye. The Supreme Immortal was very pleasantly surprised by something. Smiling, the man said that this was the true technique of the Dark Heavens. Zhang Peng confirmed this and said that in order to destroy the wall with this technique, they would need 4 Hwarang and 3 disciples. To use the true Dark Heaven technique, 7 people from the Black Snake Turtle clan were used to stand in the silhouette of the constellations. By concentrating spiritual power at the tips of their swords, they created an explosion with enough force to destroy an entire mountain. Despite the use of this destructive technique, the wall on which the painting was depicted was completely intact, despite the effort expended. The protagonist felt that the Hwarangs of the Black Snake Turtle Division had no reason to continue. The 5th Division commander, named Bom Hyun, was outraged by Sol Yong's criticism and asked him to show how it should have been done. Coming closer to the wall on which the painting was depicted, the guy began to examine it carefully. The main character silently thought about what he could do. Still, the guy thought that the members of the Black Snake Turtle Division would not like this, but he had no other choice because people's lives depended on it. The protagonist began to concentrate his spiritual power on the tip of the sword while reciting a spell, so that this power would ascend to the heavens to his yang and descend to the earth to his yin. He also asked her to pass through the clouds between the 2 elements, and when it rains the heavens will bless them. After this, the main character pointed his sword towards the wall he planned to destroy. A powerful energy charge immediately flew forward at great speed. The members of the Black Snake Turtle Division were shocked by what they saw, but they were also indignant that Sol Yun dared to use this technique. The Supreme Immortal was also surprised that the protagonist was able to use such a powerful technique, but the man watched silently and did not interfere with the guy. The members of the Black Snake Turtle Division continued to watch Sol Yun. They did not interfere with what was happening, but they believed that the guy had completely gone off the rails. The main character guessed that his actions could anger members of another division, but he didn't care about that because he did it for the sake of people.